Apple Bloom paced back and forth inside the Apple family barn, keeping her eyes locked on the door. Expectantly, the little filly's heart pounded in her chest, and through the attempt to control the surge of excited energy within her breath and hoof steps, it provided more difficult than she anticipated. Impatiently, Apple Bloom peered her eyes from the door to check on the small pile of ingredients and equipment she had gathered earlier that day. To keep her mind occupied, she ran over to the list in her head again. Dragon's Claw, Swamp Water, Phoenix Feather, Heart's Desire, Brambleberries, and of course Lightning in a bottle. It's here all except Apple Bloom? Sweetie Belle called out, opening the barn door with her magic. Apple Bloom whipped her head around with a giant grin on her face as her friends were there at last. Sweetie Belle, Scootaloo, get inside quick! Apple Bloom said as she raced to the door, pushing for her friends in the process. She poked her head outside quickly, cautiously, and her eyes darting around, hoping to find no other pony in her sights. When she was satisfied, she shut the door and exhaled in relief. "What's with all the secrecy?" Scootaloo asked. "Yeah, it's not like we're doing anything wrong, right?" Sweetie Belle asked. "Wait, right as we are doing something we aren't doing something wrong?" Scootaloo asked in confusion. "Both, or rather neither. It's complicated," Apple Bloom said, leading her friends back to the pile of ingredients and the potion vials nearby. "Did you get what I asked for?" she asked, her eyes widening in excitement. "One drop of rainbow checked," Scootaloo said, rummaging in her saddlebag for a moment before producing a small jar with the extract of rainbow. She held it out proudly to Apple Bloom. "That looks more like a jar than a drop," Sweetie Belle corrected. "Well, I didn't know exactly how much was in a drop. And besides, Rainbow Dash really moves fast. When I asked to borrow a Daring Do book, she only was gone for like 10 seconds. I had to dip the jar in her rainbow fountain while she wasn't looking. I couldn't get the lid on time. The whole thing inside my bag now is rainbow now," Scootaloo said, showing the damage in her saddlebag to her friends. "So as long as you got it, that's all what matters," Apple Bloom said, plopping herself down in front of their potion-making supplies. She barely listened to Scootaloo's story and started to mix in the ingredients. "If you think that was bad, try belling a gemstone from Rarity when she was in the middle of her gem spring collection," Sweetie Belle said in exasperation. Scootaloo's eyes widened. "Whoa, did you do it?" she asked, keenly interested in the story while Apple Bloom busted herself with her work. "It wasn't easy, and I'm sure she was going to figure out with one of her gemstones for her signature culture is missing and blame me for it. I'm always blamed for things like that when they go missing," Sweetie Belle said bitterly as she retrieved the gemstone from her own saddlebag. "Well, did you take it?" Scootaloo pointed out. "This time, but it wasn't my fault. When Opal made off of her fabulous flux fur and fabric, I still got blamed," Sweetie Belle said, holding out the gemstone for a moment before Apple Bloom swiped it away. "You're welcome," she said, a tinge of bitterness within the tone of Apple Bloom's belated ignorance of her struggle. "Yeah, thanks. And this was the biggest one you could find?" Apple Bloom asked, pouring the contents of the one potion vial into another. She didn't then look up or even acknowledge Sweetie Belle's answer, of her nodding her head. "What's so important to you that you have to have today, and without any pony else knowing?" Scootaloo echoed, realizing that's something they probably should have discussed before agreeing to have retrieved the items for their friend. "Because the potion making can only work at night, and I read somewhere that in the full moon helps makes the spell stronger. And that's tonight," Apple Bloom replied distractedly. She held a jar of rainbow over the potion bottle and gingerly tilted enough just for a single drop to fall. The potion reacted by bubbling in different colors, emitting from the smell like of rotten week-old eggs. "Ugh, what is that, Apple Bloom?" Sweetie Belle demanded, holding her snout and her hooves along with Scootaloo to avoid smelling the rancid odor in the air. "Hang on, it's almost done," Apple Bloom said, stirring the strange color-changing liquid with a wooden spoon that she held in her mouth. The potion continued changing colors, bubbling and emitting the stench for a few more seconds. When it finally stopped, it turned clear with advisory and appearance of water. Scootaloo slowly lifted one hoof from her nose to check the scent of the air, and the odor had vanished. So are you going to tell us what this is or not? Scootaloo asked, crossing her hooves and glaring down at her friend unappreciatively of her secrecy. It's a finding spell, Apple Bloom said proudly, holding the potion of liquid that came straight out from the window. What's a finding spell? Sweetie Belle asked. I read it in one of the potion books Twilight gave me to help me study. I pour it on this gemstone when it's dark out, and it lights up prettier than a star in the sky. And it leads you to whatever you lost, Apple Bloom said, her eyes widened with her voice quivering with excitement. What did you lose? Scootaloo asked. Well, it's not exactly what, it's more of a who, Apple Bloom said, as her voice was much quieter than it had been moments before. She set the potion down and stared at some of her ingredients that she had amidst of her potion-making supplies. Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle tilted their heads to get a good look of what she was seeing. Is that Applejack's hat? Is Applejack missing? Sweetie Belle gasped in horror, reaching for the hat to only have Apple Bloom block her and scoop it up in her own hooves. No, this ain't Applejack's hat. This was my pa's hat, and this was my ma's, Apple Bloom said, picking up a notebook with various songs scribbled in pages. She flipped through the book for a specific page where a dried and pressed buttercup flower had been preserved. Apple Bloom, I thought your parents were... Scootaloo started. It's not true, Apple Bloom shouted, slamming the book shut and dropping it to the ground with her father's hat. Granny said they were making a delivery to Hoofington and they just weren't heard from again. Maybe they're lost, maybe they're trying to find me, us, and they can't even remember how to get there. They're missing. And I've got to find them, Apple Bloom shouted, tears stinging in her eyes and threatening to drop. Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle cast their eyes downward, unsure of what to say. It's possible, right? Apple Bloom said, sniffling furiously and wiping her tears. Right? It's possible, Scootaloo uttered. When did Granny tell you? Sweetie Belle asked. Yesterday, and that's when I got this idea. No pony has ever tried it, so we at least have to try, Apple Bloom said. Come nightfall, and I'll add this piece of hat to the petal of the flower in the potion, and then I'll pour it on the gemstone. The book doesn't say how long it will take, but I'll stay up all night if I have to. Oh, so that's why you plan to have the last-minute sleepover then? Well, we'll stay up with you, Scootaloo said confidently. We will? We will? Sweetie Belle said, catching her breath and agreeing herself before comprehending of what she was being volunteered for. Of course we will. The Cutie Mark Crusaders stick together, right? Scootaloo exclaimed, putting her hoof forward in their typical free hoof bump. Right. Cutie Mark Crusaders, Lost Pony Finders, Apple Bloom said with a smile, putting a hoof out to meet Scootaloo's. Sweetie Belle hesitated, looking back from the hat to the flower to the potion to her friends. I don't know, guys. Isn't magic really supposed to work like that? I think this spell was for things, not ponies, she said, holding her hoof in her like if she wasn't too convinced to let him meet her friend's hooves. I know, Sweetie Belle, it's probably just a stupid idea, but I can't now. I've spent my whole life wondering what happened to them, and I just have to try, Apple Bloom said, pleading to her case. Oh, okay, I guess it can't hurt to try, Sweetie Belle said, still unsure, but buckling under the pressure she felt from Apple Bloom's sheer demeanor and hope. The free ponies hoof bumped and shouted their motto, Cutie Mark Crusaders forever! Yay! The free fillies crept quietly along the corridors of Apple Bloom's house, keeping a close eye on where her family was. Big Mac and Applejack were in the kitchen, and Granny was sleeping in the living room. They snuck out of the front door, knowing it was taking their best chances with Granny than the Apple siblings. Once they were in the clear of the house, they trotted to the other side of the barn and started unpacking the remaining ingredients of the spell. Do you think they'll see it? Scootaloo asked in a whisper, giving Apple Bloom a sealed potion vial. The book said it isn't really that bright, just a magical one. Either way, the kitchen's facing the other way, and Granny will never wake up, Apple Bloom said confidently. Can we hurry, please? Sweetie Belle asked, still nervous and uneasy with the plan. Almost ready, Apple Bloom answered, having already with the strip of the hat and petal flower to the potion. It made little streaks of brown and yellow to appear on the liquid surface. Sweetie Belle, use your magic and pour it on the gemstone. Sweetie Belle agreed, eager to get it over with, and the three fillies stared in bewilderment as the liquid splashed on the surface. Then it disappeared and the gem soaked in like a sponge. In its wake, a small bright began glowing from within, and the more Sweetie Belle poured into the gemstone, the stronger the glow became, and as the drop hit the surface, it levitated into the air, coming to a stop about the filly's eye level. Slowly at first, but with increasing speed, the gem spun around and generating a tan and a yellow light at the eavier part. Apple Bloom, are you sure this is how it's supposed to work? You said if it wasn't supposed to be this bright, Sweetie Belle squeaked, as the gemstone whirling hit a fever pitch, and let out a slight whirling noise. The light was growing stronger and brighter. Well, no, but... Apple Bloom began. The gem made a small cracking noise in midair, within twin bursts of light erupted from it. One pale yellow and the other warm tan, speeding way faster than the eye could ever follow. The gem traveled over the main pasture and fields, towards the furthest and reaches the farms that border with the everfree forest, leaving behind its trail of light, like breadcrumbs to follow. The three fillies were transfixated, marveling at its beauty. It's working! Let's go! Apple Bloom exclaimed, trotting towards after the gem with her friends in tow. The little fillies followed the gem and wove it towards neat rows of apple trees towards the far fields. Sweet Apple Acres was usually a bright and cheerful place, but in its cover of night, it would be just as frightening as the everfree forest. Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo did not want to let on how nervous they were, being as far out from the barn, or Ponyville for that matter, but they knew better than to deter Apple Bloom when she was on a mission. Where exactly did Granny Smith say to disappear again? Sweetie Belle asked. She didn't say, or rather she wouldn't say. She won't feel so silly when we bring them home, Apple Bloom said, still as confident as ever. She pulled out the short gem and it went sailing over the imposing barrier that appeared from the shadows in the gem of the faint light. She and the Crusaders approached cautiously to find the large wooden fence stretching beyond sight. Now what? Scootaloo asked. Well, it's mighty tall, but the slates aren't close enough together to keep a few fillies out. Come on, Apple Bloom said, squeezing herself through the wooden beams. I don't know about this, Sweetie Belle muttered. Don't be scared, sweetie. Usually Applejack puts up these fences to keep things organized. We haven't actually left Sweet Apple Acres. Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle exchanged worried glances before following Apple Bloom for the fence. On the other side of the barriers, the fillies found themselves in what looked to be like a wild forest, but it was in fact just an orchard of decline. The rows of trees were uneven, broken and down, dead wood scattered here and there amongst the roots of the twisted and sickly keen. Strange grasses and weeds grew among the dead, and dying apple trees and a thick layer of rotting foliage covered the forest floor. Are you sure about that, Apple Bloom? Scootaloo asked. I think so. I've never been to this part of the orchard, but I have at least heard Sis speak of it once or twice. This is the far of the Easter fields. They'll stretch all the way up to the everfree forest, or at least they did before the landslide, Apple Bloom noted. Landslide? What's a landslide? Sweetie Belle asked, as she pinned her ears reflexively against her head. And why would Applejack just fence it all off? Scootaloo asked. I don't know, Apple Bloom said carefully, as she began picking her way through the dead wood and empty patches left missing by the trees of the sickly orchard rows. Like I said, she only talked about it a couple times, and never to me last year. I overheard her telling Rainbow Dash that there was a huge flash flood that came out of the Everfree around one time when I was born. It caused a whole heap of damage, like ripping out trees and forming a landslide that went on for miles. I bet they figured that it would be better to fence it off and leave it for the animals than wasting time to fix it. In the bright moonlight, the fillies could just make out a large crescent of rocky soil and broken trees ahead of them. A huge scar of earth, rock, and death encompassed them in the free slides. Let's get out of here, Sweetie Belle whispered, as she scanned across the debris. This place don't feel right. We can't. We just gotta keep going. We've come this far, and we can't. How can we turn back now? Apple Bloom exclaimed, as she stared identifiably at her two friends. The two Crusaders looked at her awkwardly, and then looked down at their hooves. Neither wanted to be the first to change their friend's resolve. Snap. Did you girls hear that? Scootaloo asked, whirling her head around for the source of the noise. Hear what? I don't hear anything. Apple Bloom replied terselessly. Don't try and change the subject, Scoots. I wasn't, Scootaloo began, before being cut off abruptly as a howl pierced through the night. The fillies turned slowly to see green eyes glowing faintly through the brush. Apple Bloom? Sweetie Belle whispered, as a chord of terror ran through her. Do you think maybe that fence was just for organizing? Apple Bloom tried to swallow, but her throat had gotten bone dry. The chorus of replying howls could be heard in the distance, growing louder by the moment. Oh hell, sometimes she uses them to keep the critters and from the Everfree away. Critters like the timber wolves? Scootaloo whispered back, huddling close to Sweetie Belle. What do we do now? Run! Apple Bloom screamed, turning the tail and racing all away from the howls, and turning towards the whale of rubble and stone with the faint light of the gem ahead to guide her. Apple Bloom, are you crazy? We have to go back! Scootaloo screamed, trailing after her with the sobbing Sweetie Belle in tow. It's too late. This is the only way out, Apple Bloom shouted, her heart pounding faster as her hooves against the ground. The cackling of timber wolves and the wooden limbs against the brush and the scream were now audible amongst their glowing cries. Sweetie Belle screamed, and the Crusaders surged into a gallop of tears and fear, stinging their eyes. They reached the base of the old landslide and began climbing in the rubble in the faint, magical light. As Apple Bloom pulled herself down over a particularly large rock, she was surprised to see the gem hovering ahead, more inches from her face. What the? She reached forward to grab it, losing her balance and tumbling forward. She could have sworn she caught a glimpse of the old hay-colored mane and the pale light, before falling head over tail and landing hard on her back. The impact of her fall from her lungs as she struggled to pull in a deep breath against the shearing pain. Apple Bloom, where did you go? Scootaloo's voice came from above the orange-yellow Pegasus, landing on the foot on top of the yellow earth pony. Scootaloo, Apple Bloom, you two okay? Sweetie Belle's panicked voice heard. The surroundings of them brightened as they came to a focus. Sweetie Belle gasped in the gem in her magic as it levitated to the ground and dug a hole within them. The soft illumination from the sword fillies rightened themselves and took in their surroundings. The hole was in the shape of an hourglass, and two explosions had recently gone off, right next to each other. The twin craters were around 10 feet deep, nearly as wide. Apple Bloom and Scootaloo had fallen at the center, where the bowls of pits have overlapped. What could have made this? Apple Bloom mumbled, as she took the fresh burns marks that scored the sides of the pit. They're here, Sweetie Belle said in a panicked whisper. She carefully slid down the slope, coming to a skittering stop right in front of her friends, huddling necks against them with the shaking hooves as the timber wolves stalked nearer. The Crusaders sucked in a collective breath as the sounds of scrapes and leaps echoed around them. Shh, Apple Bloom whispered, pushing herself up against the side of the pit, urging for her friends to do the same. From above they could see the first timber wolf as he slowly stalked onto a boulder, sniffing the air from what seemed to be he had lost their scent and was trying to find it again. Soon he was joined by a chorus of disgruntled grunts and growls from the wolves, out of their line of sight. Somehow the wolves had lost them, and the Crusaders waited for their bated breath for the wolves to search somewhere else at their midnight snack. However, their hope was for survival and short-lived when the gem had begun following. The one Sweetie Belle had brilliantly pulled down in the hole with them had suddenly flared into a collated with magical energy. It shot into the sky, hovering one above them as they glowed brighter than it had before, blinding them and bathing in the crater with the bright white light. The panicked and angry sounds of timber wolves above grew the intensify of the light. Then, without a warning, an ear-piercing berserker shriek came from above, followed by a series of sickening crunches and snaps. Something else was up there with the wolves, and it moved with a limp, a step and then with a drag, and the noises made it were guttural, almost primal, although almost like any animal or beast that the fillies have heard before. Another wolf cried out from the other side of the pit, followed by more crunching and snapping. A deeper and more drawn-out moan came from that direction. But this creature's steps fell louder, faster than the first. What timber wolves remained foolish wasn't enough to make a new advisory. They collectively bound over the crater, tripping over themselves to flee in a new advisory. One of the wolves took a misstep, colliding into another wolf before tumbling into the base of the pit pieces. Sweetie Belle tried to scream, but Apple Bloom covered her mouth. The Crusaders could do nothing but watch in silent horror as the timber wolf reassembled itself before its very eyes. Its heaving breath gusted into their faces as it glared them down. It opened its mouth and ready to strike, but it paused when it heard the groan of the monsters above them. The ears rustled, flattening against the bark of its head. It turned away from the fillies, and it leaped out of the pit and followed to their wolves in the orchard before the Crusaders could have probably processed what they had just seen. The only sounds that had remained were gurgling and moaning from above. "It's gotta be them. They saved us. Ma, Pa," Apple Bloom cried out, pulling away from the others, and tried to climb out the pit. Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle were, though, relieved to see the wolves retreat, weren't as blindly as optimistic as their friend. "If it were your parents who saved us, why haven't they said anything?" Sweetie Belle asked it, frightened. "Maybe they can't hear us. Ma, Pa, we're down here, help!" Apple Bloom called out. The noise above them slowed to a stop. The silence was deafening to their ears as their heart raced. "I don't think that's your parents," Scootaloo cautioned. "They scared the timber wolves away, did they?" Apple Bloom insisted, a little less hopeful in intonation. "Yeah, because they were scarier," Scootaloo shouted. "I don't want to die! I don't want to die!" Sweetie Belle chanted, curling into a little ball against Scootaloo. "Ha ha!" Apple Bloom announced happily, having to find a solid object to help pull her upwards. Scootaloo's eyes widened as she realized a bone jutting out from the gravel. "Apple Bloom, don't! Do something!" Sweetie Belle screamed as Apple Bloom heard the mouth of the crater. Scootaloo looked up at the gem, which still hovered above their soon-to-be grave. She picked up some rocks in her hooves and started to throw it at them. "Hey, watch it! What are you doing?" Apple Bloom cried, ducking away from Scootaloo's shot. "Come on, Sweetie Belle, help me!" Scootaloo shouted. You can't! I just got them back!" Apple Bloom screamed, fighting harder to make it out of the crater. Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo didn't listen, setting their sights on the beacon of the light and refusing to deter from their task. At last, Apple Bloom hoisted herself out of the pit and out of the eyesight of the two Crusaders. "Ma, Pa, I did it! Sweetie Belle looked at Scootaloo and perked up her ears above. The pair had unintentionally stopped in their tracks when Apple Bloom fell silent. "Apple Bloom?" Sweetie Belle called out, to which there was no reply. "Apple Bloom!" she screamed again in vain. "Hurry!" Scootaloo shouted, making a drastic action by climbing on top of Sweetie Belle to try and get a better aim. She then struggled and launched herself up to her friend to get a better aim. The rock in her hoof successfully made contact with the gem, knocking it from the sky down with the crater with the two of them. The gems shattered on impact, and the sound of it reverberating around them were much larger than it was. The glow from them slowly dissipated into absence. The fillies could only hear a soft sobbing from above. "Hang on, Apple Bloom, we're coming," Sweetie Belle called out, as she and Scootaloo then scaled the unhewn walls, helping each other out of the crater. They saw a curled-up, quivering Apple Bloom and raced to her side. "What is it? Are you okay? What happened?" Scootaloo asked. "She lied," Apple Bloom whispered bitterly. "Huh?" Sweetie Belle asked. Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo's eyes were adjusted to the moonlight to see two crumpled masses, flanks of the Crusaders. One of them was upward towards the moon, and it was deep, eyeless sockets staring back at the fillings. Strands of brittle red cascaded around the sides of the snout, concealing the missing lower jaw underneath. As well as the rest of the body was well-preserved, gaunt, muscleless figure. The other figure remained turned away from them, but within the faint light, they could see the taut, wretched skin stretched over a remain of the incomplete body. Limbs jutted out at unnatural angles, like a rag doll exposing dried, mangled carnage from within. A single red ribbon pulled out of what remained to be a sickly orange mane to them, displaying a crooked, disfigured neck, and its head severed. The Crusaders then stood dumbfounded until Applebloom stirred, pointing her hoof on the ground just beyond. The old tune crosses had laid in splinter pieces on the ground, newly shattered, although they were just hard to read. But in the moonlight, the Crusaders still made out the carvings that read, Pear Butter and Bright Mac. Sweetie Belle turned her head to the crates that they had been refugee, and the pieces slowly sank into place. Applebloom's breathing had turned haggard as her eyes stung with tears. In anger and anguish, she cried into the night.